speaking. I love myself more than anyone. And I got love for the genuine. Anyone, genuine. I love myself more than anyone. Many one brown, many one black. They left the sequence on walls to get back. The message for years I've been lost in the crack.
So check yourself. More importantly, how many of you guys enjoy roller coaster rides? If you enjoy roller coaster rides, raise your hand, drop something in the chat. I want to know who I'm working with. Kevin shaking his head like, no. You know, all things in moderation for me. This is one of those things to where one time is, and I'm good. You know, if I tried it once, I don't have to try it again, except for one ride, because it was just speed. It wasn't all the spinning and swirling. It was just speed. It was at Universal. I think it's called the Cheetah. The Cheetah is just fast. It does a couple of loops, but nothing too fancy to where, you know, start to get nauseated. So, but how many of you guys have heard of the expression emotional roller coaster? Right? Just give me a nod or something like that so I can know. And so I think the reason why it's important to check in with ourselves is because a lot of us, without knowing, are on this roller coaster almost on a daily basis, you know, and our bodies are communicating to us, our brains are communicating to us, and some of us may not have the tools to just get off of this ride or just say, you know what, I'm good for now, I can come back later. You know, a lot of us aren't choosing is what I'm saying. And so I want to go in this presentation and with the outcome of giving us a choice on whether or not we want to go on this ride or not, because we definitely don't have to, you know. And so let's dive in. All right, come on now. Behave. All right, we saw that one already. Right now, I know we did the breathing. Right now, how do you feel right now? You know, and this is a question to where when we're asked it casually, when people ask this question, we usually say, I'm good, I'm all right, I'm fine, I'm all right, you know, we just give that, and that over the years probably trained us to not pay attention to what's actually going on. You know, and so after a while of just saying, hey, I don't know, I'm okay, we stop paying attention to all of the things that are being communicated to us by our bodies, by our minds, to be able to get into a space of knowing where we are on that spectrum, high, low, or ascending, descending, however you want to see it. So without answering, but just think about, how do you feel right now? You know, and we're going to parse that out. We're going to let that breathe a little bit more so you can get a better understanding of what we mean by how do you feel right now. There are a couple of areas that when it comes to your mental health are really specific for you to check in. You know, this is a space where we're going to definitely dive into a lot of things mental health. We might do some other topics one day, but for the most part, you're going to get mental health. And so when I do my talks in public spaces, I usually utilize 3 physical bodies, and I put them in front of the audience so everyone can see them. And then we name them different parts of what our mental health is comprised of. You know, and so one of the first things that we do, I'll get back to that one. One of the first things that we do is we name the physical, right? So the physical body, right? The whole physical body is a part of your mental health. You know, that's the part that we see. That's the part that interacts with us. That's the part that, you know, we can actually touch. You know, these are the things that we can measure. Most of the things that, you know, we can interact with on a healthy basis. So when you're asking yourself, how do you feel? What's been going on? You know, you have to ask or pay attention to what is happening in your physical body. You know, they have meditations to where you can scan your body. They tell you, feel your toes. Do you feel your ankles? Go up to your calf muscle. I think it will be well for us to do this on a regular basis to know what's going on with our body, because what you'll see at the very end is all of them are interconnected. And so if we're looking, or if we're paying attention to what's going on with our physical, it will help us answer this next one easier. What's going on with our emotions? You know, that's the second part. So if you think about 3 physical bodies standing in front of you, one person will represent the physical or the interactions that we have. One person will represent the emotional side of us. And then the last person will represent the thinking, the mental side of us. And when you think about mental health, that's what it really is. It's your thinking, your feelings, and your behaviors. So when you're checking in with yourself, when you ask yourself, how am I doing? If somebody asks you, how are you doing? What they're really asking, or what they should really be asking, is what's going on with your physical body? Like, where are you? And of course, there are more areas, but when it comes to mental health, we're going to focus on these three: the physical, the emotional, and the mental. What's going on with your emotions? Where have they been? High, low, high, low, high, low. Are we keeping track of them? Do we even know? And sometimes, like I said, because we're so used to just saying, I'm all right. And so that answer isn't readily available. What is going on with my emotions? How have I been feeling? Am I okay with the feelings that I have been feeling? And so because we are paying attention, then what allows us to interact with those emotions in a healthier way, to know whether or not I need to do something to elevate it, whether or not I need to do something to maintain it, or whether or not I need to just keep on, ascending, always trying to get better. So that knowledge, the knowing of what's going on with your mental, physical, and emotional, all of that comprised of your mental health, right? And so now, checking in with yourself gets a little bit clearer when you have more understanding of all of the parts that really, really relates when you open up checking in with yourself. So this is the part of a presentation that I was exposed to from a neuroscientist by the name of Dr. Bruce Perry. And I sent a link out with his information in there. This guy, man, brilliant guy, who did a study over some years to understand how our minds and our bodies correlate when it relates to traumatic experiences and our regulatory and deregulatory state. I know I said a lot. Let me break that down a little bit. Once I heard him say that, I'm like, man, you talking about us. You talking about a lot of the stuff we deal with on a daily basis. In fact, the example that he used, I'm like, yeah, you talking about us. You're talking about us without saying you're talking about us, but you're talking about us. What he said was that he worked with a lot of elite coaches, basketball coaches, football coaches, and he works with them, college coaches specifically. I'm sure he worked with NFL and all the other stuff as well. But he worked with these elite coaches to help them understand their athlete's mind, to better work with them, to get the best out of them, And then he said something that I'm like, yeah, you talking about us. He said, a lot of them are from the inner city. And then he said, that's where all the talent is. I'm like, okay, yeah, you talking about us, right? And so without feeling any bias or anything, I'm like, but he's right. A lot of us that grew up in these circumstances have a lot of issue with self-regulation, understanding what's going on in our internal mental and emotional state. And then we show up to spaces to where we're missing out. We're not getting the best out of us, and therefore we're missing out on incredible opportunities. What he said, even before he said this, a part of what I do is work with NFL, NBA, athletes, entertainers, to figure out what's going on in their life to get the best out of them. But once I heard this, I'm like, man, this doesn't just make sense for them. This makes sense for all of us. A lot of us are showing up in spaces and we're not aware of how we're showing up. And then it's allowing us to not be in that mental state that gives us the best opportunity to perform, and that emotional state to give us the best opportunity to relate to ourselves and others in a healthy way. And it's just a relationship killer. What they said was that a lot of the athletes would get to college on these scholarships, and because they had a lot of traumatic experience, they've had a lot of traumatic experiences in their childhood growing up, they get to college very talented, but have not figured out how to regulate their emotions. And so when challenged, when pushed, when they start to feel, we're going to get into these terminologies in a little bit, but when they start to feel unsettled, when they get triggered, when somebody push you and you're from the hood, what you say, I'm gonna keep it real, And so sometimes, and keeping it real, and sometimes not understanding how to manage those emotions, they get into a lot of verbal altercations, physical altercations, and they get into situations to where they have to lose their scholarship, they lose their position on the team, they have to go back home, Some of them even get kicked out of their NFL or NBA careers because they don't understand how to regulate, how to check in with themselves enough to know that I'm not in a healthy state right now. I may need to alter that state to get to a better state. So some of the terminologies Dr. Bruce Perry introduced me to are these two right here: regulated, deregulated. And I'm sure most of you have heard these terminologies before, but you're going to use them in a totally different way after we get through with this. Regulated, exactly what it sounds like. You are in a healthy state, mind, body, soul, spirit, however you want to, wrap it up. You are in a great state. And we know that. We know when we are in a regulated state. We know that if we pay attention enough, if we trace back a couple of days, we will be able to figure out exactly when we were regulated. Now, deregulated, the best example that I have for this is that they used to have the Snicker commercial that says, you're not yourself when you're hungry. And being hungry is one of those deregulatory factors, meaning something that allows you to be in a lower self versus the higher self, the regulated and deregulated. So when you're hungry, sometimes you've heard the terminology, people use this terminology, hangry, meaning hungry and angry. And I know for some of us, man, when we don't get that meal inside of us, we get grumpy. So Snicker did a great job in their market research figuring out that a lot of us are deregulated in the state of hunger. Grab a Snicker. That was great marketing, And so understanding that hunger is just one of the many things that deregulate us, that puts us in a state to where our mental, emotional, physical, spiritual isn't at its best, where we can't perform at our best, when we can't show up in our relationships, the healthiest versions of us, And then we're going to talk about some of the things that this can afford us. I never want to leave any presentation making us feel bad about a part of us. That's not what this is about. There isn't a good or bad side. All of this is inside of us. The regulated side of us is governed by the parasympathetic nervous system, and the deregulated by the autonomic nervous system. So it's a part of us. We need that balance between the two in order to function at our best. So let's talk about some of these mental states and how they work for us. So one of the most important things I know that comes out of this is that once you start to see this, you're going to start seeing other people that you're going to be like, yeah, that person's deregulated. That's this person. Oh, I know that person very well. Don't focus on other people for this presentation. See yourself in each one of these, because this is a part of all of us. Try your best. It may not be in the past week, year, month, but really stretch yourself to understand that all of us are capable of being in any one of these states at any given time. It's just a matter of what the environment, what triggers are around, and so forth. So let's start with the calm state. When you're calm, we just did that breathing exercise, and I left there feeling calm, right? And in your calm state, where your IQ is on average between 110 to 100. Of course, some people are brilliant, they're higher than that. But when you're calm, you are afforded most of your intellectual capacity. When you're calm, you are using your brain fully. When you're calm, you make healthier decisions, based on making decisions from a space of mental capacity, And then our sense of time is a part of being regulated as well. When we're in a calm state, we have the opportunity to decide not just for the present, but we can also forecast and understand the consequences or benefit how they will impact us in the extended future. So when you're calm, listen, we are on all cylinders, basically. You get way more done, but I know we can't live here. This is not life per se, or can it be? We'll get back to that. In the alert state is where I think a lot of us have been programmed to reside, where our attentions are divided. We have all these things trying to capture our attention. One of the things I really appreciate about being in Georgia now is that there are less road signs, there are less billboards when you're outside of the city. And my eyes need that, because there are so many things fighting for your attention to where we're kept in an alert state, and in the alert state, I've even heard people say, I work well under pressure. That person, I like that pressure, to be programmed to believe that you're functioning at your best under duress. No, your mental capacity is diminished. You can still function here, but your mental capacity is diminished. Your sense of time is diminished. You're making decisions for the days and the hours ahead. But this is not where we actually can thrive. This is surviving, but it's not thriving. I know we can get here, and we'll talk about what we need to do to stay in here, or to make sure we know how to get back in here. Now, this line right here, this line is a line of demarcation separating the regulated and the deregulated self. You can liken this line to the triggers that we experience in our day-to-day, and some of those triggers are people, some of those triggers are places, some of those triggers are music, entertainment. It might be our workspaces, it may be our significant other, it may be our kids. And it's not to point the finger at them. They're just playing the role and helping us understand that there's a balance. We have to learn how to manage this. When those triggers are around, we have to know how to stay regulated. We have to know how to change the relationship with the trigger in order to either avoid going to a deregulated state or knowing exactly what we need if we have to be around the trigger to get back to a regulated state. All right, so let's cross over. In the alarm state, the alarm state sounds just exactly what it is. When you are in an alarm state, when you hear an alarm, in fact, Black people don't need alarms. We just need to see one person taking off and all of us taking off right after that person too. That's our alarm. And sometimes, a lot of the times, what the programming is it keeps us in an alarm state. News media, radio, all these different things, almost, I could be a little conspiracy theorist sometimes, but sometimes I feel like it's intentional to keep us in an alarm state because we function to our disadvantage in an alarm state. This is when the autonomic nervous system kicks in. This is when your fight and flight kicks in. This is when we start to live in a survival mode. This is when your body tenses up. This is when a lot of us go into restaurants and have to sit with our backs against the wall and having to see everything in front of us because we're hyper paranoid. This is some of us who can't trust because we've been betrayed before. So when somebody comes that you don't know or some unfamiliar circumstance come in, you're already at an alarm state, right? Your mental capacity diminish, your awareness of time diminishes as well. You're just not at a healthy state. I'll get to these in a minute. And then after a while, we may end up in a fearful state. And a fear state is exactly what it sounds like. When we are dealing with fear or anxiety, a couple of things start to falter. Our short and long-term memories compromise in a fearful state as well. How many of you guys ever study for an exam weeks in advance, months in advance, and then you get to that exam day and your mind goes blank? Well, in an anxious state, in a fearful state, you diminish. What happens is that your short-term memory isn't accessible as it would be in a calm state, And so over here, this is not who you really are. This is not your best self, but some of us, we know we function in a fear state as we go around in our day-to-day, getting in our cars, driving around, going outside, For a couple of years, it was difficult to even imagine that we can go back outside. So we stayed in a fearful state, and being in this fearful state doesn't bring the best out of us when we're relating to each other, In fact, this state is one of those things that really opened my eyes to the relationships between law enforcement and Black men, right? The idea sometimes comes in to say that they are fearful of us for whatever biases or for whatever reason, personal or not, they may have. They are fearful of us. So the way they interact with us is based on a fear interaction. And understanding that if this person is approaching me and they're in a deregulated fear state, then look at where their IQ is. Look at their decision making, right? Look at what's governing their interaction, the fight or flight mode. This is not where I want to interact with law enforcement. And I know a lot of us, talking to Black men, a lot of us don't have fear. A lot of us don't have real anxiety when it comes to law enforcement. But when you add a person who is anxious on the other side of that equation, if I know that person is over here, then that's a person that I'm concerned about because I know that person isn't making a healthy decision based on being deregulated. Going even further, being deregulated is not where we do our best parenting. This is not where we make healthy decisions for our kids. One of the examples that I know come easily to our minds is that we yell at our kids to tell them to stop yelling, right? So you're deregulated, they're deregulated, and we're trying to resolve an issue. And so this is not where we resolve a lot of our conflicts. This is where a lot of our conflicts actually begin, And so over here may not be the healthiest state for us to make any of those decisions. And then the terror state, this is where all gloves are off. All gloves are off. This is where we start to say things to each other, interact with each other, in a very unpleasant way. This is where this is where words come out. This is where relationships end. This is where we do things that we can't take back. And this is not to point any finger. This is to say that a lot of us have lived in relationships where the relationship, majority of it, functioned over here, and the relationship could be romantic, it could be family, it could be an employee relationship. We've had those relationships to where when we approach those relationships, we automatically start to feel deregulated. And what does the feels like in your body when you're deregulated? That's up for you to understand. That's why we have to check in with ourselves and ask those questions earlier. How do I feel? What is my body communicating to me? Some of us feel it in our necks. Some of us is in our back. Some of us is in our gut. We had Joanne on last week talking about gut health and how it relates to our overall mental and emotional health. That's important. When we're deregulated, another unhealthy part about being over here is that our cravings change. When you have a high level of adrenaline and cortisol in your system, you're craving those salts and those sweets. I need some chips. I need something crunchy. I need some Popeye's chicken. You need something that will allow you to get a huge lump of dopamine or norepinephrine in your something that's going to allow you, oxytocin in your system, that's going to allow you to feel good. You go for the low hanging fruit because the decisions that we make over here aren't the best. And then no sense of time. This right here is one of the worst things, because when you are in a terror state, you're not thinking about the consequences present. You're not thinking about the consequences future. You're not thinking about anything. You're in a state to where you're backed against the wall, and naturally the idea is to fight, flight, or freeze. And so over here is definitely not where our relationships are healthy, where our even self-love is healthy. When we're over here, this is not the state where I'm saying I love myself. This is not the state where I'm caring for myself. It's not the state where I'm buying myself sneakers, where I'm doing the things that make me feel loved, and then the idea of freeze, flight, or fight, those are interchangeable with any one of these, because all of us are different. It's not to say that when you're in alarm, you be at freeze, or when you're in fear. It's to say that any one of these can show up based on our natural defenses. These are things that are actually designed to help us stay alive. When the autonomic nervous system kicks in, it's to say, listen, I'm going to take the driver's seat for a while because you need to survive. You need to survive. And a lot of us have been driven for a very long time by the autonomic nervous system, and it's not allowing us to thrive. We're surviving over here. This is survival mode. Freeze, the example of that is, when we shut down. When we shut down, we don't want to interact, no words, or better known as the cold shoulder. We box people out. You don't want to interact, flight, we're out of there, no words at all. Or you may say some choice words or whatever it is, but you get out of there. You're running, you get the energy, adrenaline kicks in, you have the momentum to get out of there, you leave, right? It's healthy. I grew up in the islands. I got chased by dogs a lot. It's healthy if you run it from a dog and you need that adrenaline to help you run faster. You're out of there. So adrenaline, the autonomic nervous system kicks in, give you an extra boost. You can run or you can fight when it's necessary. Sometimes, I like to say that I reserve my deregulated self for those who require it. When I need to survive, when I need to defend myself, which, I'm not forecasting, but I'm saying that my system, my body, my being is designed for me to be able to utilize the gift of what comes with the adrenaline and cortisol in the right occasion. So it's reserved for those occasions to where I may have to defend myself, my children, my family, and so forth, And so all of these are appropriate in the right context, right? For individuals who may not have the tools to get back to a regulated state, these two may be your go-to. Sometimes if you don't have the right words to say, don't say anything. Keep quiet for a moment, because when we're over here, we're liable. We're liable to say certain things that may not be healthy for us in the immediate and in the near future. And over here, this is where I talk to a lot of my male clients. I'm saying, like, if you are in a deregulated state in any circumstance and you have to get out of there, get out of there. Do not engage while you're over here. You know, it may not be necessary to engage. So sometimes what you may have to do is leave, you know, and I know sometimes people are like, well, I want to resolve the conflict. We're not resolving anything while we're over here. So sometimes it's good to separate, get yourself back into a regulated state, which we'll talk about in a minute, before it leads to this right here, which could be verbal, which could be emotional, which could be physical, which could be financial, which could be a lot of different things. This is where violence occurs. And so what we're trying to do is avoid going here at all costs. So sometimes you may have to get out of there, right? So now, there is a fourth F that is usually left off the chart. It's called flock. So there's freeze, there's flight, there's fight, and then there's flock. Flock is not the one they talk about when you're studying psychology. Flock is more about the understanding of how we relate to each other in a communal, more corporate setting, you know, in a more societal setting. When we flock, meaning the persons whose emotion, the person who has the most dominance in the space usually dictate the emotion of the room, you know? And so you ever walk into a room and it's already deregulated and it's hard for you to even settle in because the space is already deregulated. That's what we're talking about, you know? And let's say if you're at an organization and some bad news came in and management is panicking, and if the person at the top is panicking, then everybody else will kind of follow suit, you know? But if they have it together and they're not panicking and they're, you know, they learn how to get back into a calm state, more likely than not, more people will follow. So what it's saying is that the flock example is about the sheep and the shepherd. Wherever the sheep goes mentally, emotionally, even physically sometimes, you know, like I said, Black people, we see one person running, we're going to follow right after them. So sometimes when one person's emotion gets too heavy in the space, a lot of us flock to what they're feeling, which is not a healthy thing unless that person who is up there knows how to regulate themselves to get us, sometimes those who can flock, get back to a regulated state. These are our teachers, you know, these are our nurses, these are our doctors, these are our first responders, these are our, you know, these are our parents, you know, this is all of us basically that needs to learn how to be in that situation, and knowing somebody's looking at you to regulate your emotion, to make sure you're in a good space so that your emotion won't be contagious to the rest of the people that look up to you. And a lot of us aren't even aware of where we are emotionally, which why our impacts are even greater, you know, and not in a positive way, that is. And so sometimes freeze, flight, and freeze, flight, fight may all be evident of us flocking, meaning following whoever is that person that's in that room that kind of dominates when it comes to mental and emotional state, you know. And then the best part about knowing that we can be in any one of these states is knowing what is necessary to get back to the regulated state, you know. The easy example, like I said, is grabbing a Snicker, but there are plenty of things that we can do to learn how to get back to that regulated state. You know, some of those things, of course, just breathing. Some of those things are meditation. Some of those things may be grabbing a Snicker, meaning getting a meal inside of you. Some of us may just need to eat, and getting in a meal will change how you feel. It'll make you feel good, you know? Some of us may just need to go for a walk. Some of us, it may be a cold shower, a warm bath, whatever it is, it's specific to you. That's getting back to the regulated state. Some of us need to learn how to avoid what those triggers are in general. You know, a lot of the things that triggered me, that kept me in a regulated state, they're not a part of my life anymore. And if they're showing up, that means I'm still inviting them, means I'm still finding room to allow certain things, people, places. You know that number when you see it on the phone and you know, like, man, I don't want to pick up this phone. Don't pick it up. Or when you get that text message and that person is texting you, you know, that giant bubble, right? You're like, Mel, I don't want to respond. Don't respond. Our job isn't to engage when we're in a deregulated state. Our job is to make sure that we, because of our own self-love, because of what it does for our own bodies, bring ourselves back into a space where we can enjoy what it means to be in a calm state, to utilize our intellectual capacity, to be able to make decisions that are healthy for us right now and in our extended future, you know? And so putting all of this together, I wanted you to really see yourself in either the regulated or deregulated state, you know? None of these are good or bad or worse than the other. All of them are necessary in the context of when they're being utilized for the appropriate reason, you know? Deregulated state, that name sounds heavy, but all of us get deregulated on a daily basis. When all of us get tired, some of us get frustrated, some of us have to breathe our way back, you know? Phone a friend, listen to some music, you know? And whatever it takes to get us back to that regulated state. Some of us may know that we're right on this line right here, you know, that fine line between regulated and deregulated. And then we play both, you know, we're like, yeah, I'm good, you know. Overall, what you're doing when you're staying in this state, when you're visiting the state, is that you're aging yourself sooner, you know. You're causing your body to decay faster. You're more susceptible to diseases over here. And when we're in a deregulated state, the impacts are astronomical. We talked about parenting. This is where, on this side right here, this is where we do a lot of the deregulating in our kids, right? For those who have parents, for those who have kids, or for those who were parents, some of us were parented by parents who were deregulated. And we remember what it felt like to be in that body, to be deregulated. And in fact, there's a great TED Talk, Kev, you know, by a doctor out in California named Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She wrote a wonderful book. I don't have it close to me. It's right there. It's called The Deep as Well. Talked about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And one of the things she mentioned is that the deregulated state is where adrenaline and cortisol gets pumped into these young bodies, these children bodies. And what happens is, after a while of being deregulated, being in a traumatic mind, after a period of time, being repetitive, the adrenaline and cortisol stays in their system for far too long, which causes them to not have capacity to the peers who aren't deregulated. And once I heard that, man, when I heard that years ago, I'm like, man, they're talking about us again. I grew up in South Florida. We have train tracks everywhere. And the running understanding, or the running joke, is that one side of the track, you know, that's the good side. The other side of the train track is the bad side. And one of the things we used to believe is that the kids who went to school on the other side of the train track were better than us. They were smarter than us. They had more capacity than us. And that was so far from the truth. What was happening is that was a lot of us who grew up in, let's say, Opelika or any inner city, you know, that had deregulatory factors inside of our home and outside of our home. A lot of us were dealing with trauma. And when we show up in our trauma mind, our mental capacity diminished, our capacity to learn diminished, our capacity to socially regulate and be in healthy social relationships are compromised. And then the study also goes on to say that the impacts aren't just in childhood. These impacts follow us up into adulthood, to where they could even lessen our years of life. When I heard that, I'm like, man, I need to make sure I work on these parts of me so that I can live long and prosper. This is our life we're talking about, that when we don't know that this system, this thing that is actually supposed to help us, you know, when it's being overworked, keep us in a state to where we're not just deregulated as adults, but we're deregulating our kids, we're traumatizing our kids, you know. And then the cycle continues, because they will have known how to, what I've learned to say, function over here as if this is normal. You know, we normalize a lot of our interaction over here, so we have learned how to function and create some type of normalcy. This is all I know, you know. This is how my parents did it, to Sal. The community did it to Sal. This person did it to Sal. They spoke to me. And so we've normalized a lot of these interactions, and then the next generation can normalize. And before you know it, 3 or 4 generations of people that interact over here and function over here, and relationships start and end over here, and miss out on the benefits of being in a regulated mind, in a calm state, in our healthiest self, making great decisions, not just for ourselves, but our extended future as well. And so I know I said a lot. I want to get into some questions, because there's more we can pull out from this, but let's get into some questions. We can open the microphone up.
I was going to say, you did a great job explaining this, and we need a process point because this was a lot, right?
Right.
So for one, I wanted to just kind of get a poll from everyone. Have you ever, and you can put it in the chat, yes or no, have you ever seen emotions explained in this kind of way? Yes or no in the chat, so that we can kind of get a baseline of where we're at. All right, I got some no's. Anyone else? Okay, so seeing this spread out in this way, does anybody want to share what were some of your first reactions personally when you were seeing this? Sherry, please unmute.
Good afternoon, everybody. So happy to be here. When I heard this being explained, the first thing I thought about also was my childhood and the violence that went on. It was everywhere. If my parents weren't fighting, my neighbors were fighting. And it was the norm. So, I mean, when the police came, they would calm my dad down and leave. And then as soon as they left, it would escalate even more because who called the police, right? So yeah, that was just my comment. It's the norm, and as you become an adult, you have to realize how to interact with your kids, with your husband or significant other in a way other than yelling and violence.
So true, so true. I think sometimes we don't recognize how those examples, make such a huge impression on us, and we don't notice it until we're doing it ourselves, or sometimes we're doing it ourselves and we don't notice it. So those examples are definitely some of the basis for why we're triggered in these ways. So thank you, Sherry, for sharing. Mama Isan?
Thank you for calling on me. The idea of flocking is new to me. I mean, it explained with regards to regulation and deregulation is new to me. And there is a term that I recently became familiar with, maybe in the past few months, called co-regulation. And when you started talking about flock or flocking and how being in the deregulated states can be a manifestation of us flocking or cause us to flock towards the strongest energy or emotional pull in the room, it made me think about this idea of co-regulation and how when you have different energies or different levels of energies or emotions, that people often tend to well, not people often, but usually one of those energies has a greater pull than the others. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think one of the things for me, when I think about flock, because it was new to me when he shared it with me as well, is the idea of kind of handing over your emotions, to someone else. That it's scary because it's like it's trust in some kind of way in the moment, but it's actually like giving up your power and giving up your control and letting someone else be that determining factor for you, right?
Right.
So that's like it's a dangerous thing, right? If, like he's saying, like people who are in a position of leadership, in a position of power, they have a responsibility, they have a responsibility to model for us what regulated and deregulated states are, because then just like you said, that co-regulation, we're going to flock to that energy. So thank you for making that point. It was a really great point.
Can I say one other thing?
Of course.
And it's really just to add to what you just said. I can see the beauty in flocking as well. When you have like Baba Matt was saying, you know, a parent or a teacher or a nurse or a leader that knows how to help bring you back to bring the group or the individual back to a state of regulation.
Yeah, those were some important points, you know. One of the things that I like to do about my learning when I was in college was make it personal for me, you know. And so I remember writing down a lot of the psychological terminologies and then writing a hood definition is what I call it, you know. I'm like, yeah, that's that one time then this happened with this person. That person was definitely deregulated. I remember that. And so it helps me really bring it back home. And so it's good to really find those examples that are close to you where you can actually see yourselves in each one of these to determine what are the things that I should be paying attention to that will tell me where I am. What are my indicators? This is why checking in regularly, when I say regularly, I mean at least 3 times a day, to where you asking the question, where am I mentally, emotionally, physically? You can go even further, spiritually, you know, all these things that impact our mental and emotional state. Checking in with yourself allows that balance or the awareness that can lead you towards the
That's
balance.
right.
You
That's
know?
right. Mama Camilla, would you still like to go?
I was just thinking, I may be just echoing what everyone else is saying. Flock was new to me as well, and it kind of put things in perspective. It gave me a new term to use to communicate that to myself. You know what I mean? Because I can definitely see, like you were saying, kind of linking situations when you've been in that, you know, when you've experienced that. And I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even see it like that. And it definitely is, I can see how it's all connected with the idea, the umbrella of self-love being more mindful of what's going on inside of yourself. And when you're in that state, you know, instead of being under, I guess, the movement of the strongest force around you, like you said, bringing that ownership back to yourself, being more conscious of where you want to go. And
Right.
so if you could kind of bring yourself to this state of, oh, wow, I'm like in the middle. It's like a dream. You know how like when you are in a lucid dream, you're like, oh, wait,
Right.
I'm in this situation. Okay, how do I take myself, you know, back to a regulated state? And
Right.
am I being either consciously or unconsciously pulled,
Mhm.
deregulated? You know what I mean? Am I being consciously deregulated, or is that the purpose of this environment? Is that the purpose of the strongest force around me? Or is this just a situational thing? There's so many different ways to kind of analyze it. So definitely that was a high point for me as well.
Thank you. And I think when I heard you speak, you talked about time, really, because you were saying wait. You know, I think sometimes because we're deregulated, we're so quick to do something, to answer, to act, to react, you know, and like he says, it puts us in this survival, you know, this place where I feel like I have to do something. So when you're even in, like you said, that's a self-love moment, right? It's taking a pause, that, you know what, let me just wait, let me just focus on my breath for this moment instead of the thought that was racing, you know, through my mind and basically putting me in that weird place, like you said, that dream world when I'm like, I'm not sure what's going on here, but I know I don't like it. And I can tell you this personally because I've had dreams like this where it actually makes me lucid. So I'll be in a dream and something's happening in the dream and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't like this. And then I'm like, I'm dreaming. So then if I'm recognizing in that moment, I'm actually creating a moment of awareness in my dream to be like, this situation doesn't have to go this way, right? And so if I can do that in my subconscious mind, right, which is where we store all those things, then when I'm in my waking mind, when I'm awake, I have a better chance of catching it and stopping it in those moments. So thank you for bringing up that point about time.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit further, because this is where you really start to see not just yourself but other people, and this is the start of increasing your emotional IQ. People hear the IQ, emotional IQ, emotional IQ. You got to be aware, and that checking in with self is what keeps us aware. Now, let's talk about some of the best moments that we've had in our lives. You know, today is my daughter's birthday. A happy moment for us was we went to her school, went to Colombo, brought her some gifts. We had a nice little gathering with her class. Made me happy, right? Now, I registered that when I checked in with myself, that experience happened over here. I was very regulated, felt great, and then I can think of moments of my week where I didn't feel that well and my interactions weren't as pleasant. I know I was deregulated. Now, to go further, I have to attach what was it about that time period that made me feel regulated versus what were those triggers that brought me to a deregulated state. Me tracking that is my own responsibility. Me knowing that and balancing that is my own responsibility. No one outside of you as an adult is responsible for your regulation and deregulation. In our relationships, this is where it really hits home for our couples, our parents, parents out there. Any relationship that you're in, it's not your partner's responsibility to regulate you. It's your own responsibility to know where you are. That's why it says check yourself. Don't check your partner, which we like to do. Let me check this person real quick. You disrespected me, making me do this, and we can go on and how outside and things influences us in our mental and emotional state. It's our job to know, to check in. How do I feel? What is causing me to feel this way? What are those things that have allowed me to get back into my regulated state? And once I've created a knowing of those things, understanding what gets me there and understanding what I need to get back into that state, then I share with my willing partner, meaning if they don't have the willingness, then no point of even sharing. I share it with my willing partner to know how to then enter into my life to be the best assist in my regulation. Then that's not their primary, to assist me in my regulation, of course, because I care and I love and I desire to create an atmosphere that is regulated. Then I know certain things that allows my partner to feel deregulated. I know what things will help her, what things will help my kids get back to a regulated state, and then I assist. But my primary isn't to regulate my wife. My primary is to make sure that I'm regulated so that when I interact with her, she's getting the best version of me. My primary job is to regulate myself so that when I interact with my kids, they're getting the best version of me. And then as parent to child, our job is to interact from this side. You're not going to be a deregulated parent regulating a deregulated child. You're over here, more likely than not, they're going to come over here with you. You're going to, that's where the enmeshment, that's where the flocking comes in. That's where it's, the expression is, don't do what I say, or don't do what I do what I say, to mean that, I may be deregulated, but don't you join me over here, right? Instead of getting ourselves back into a regulated state and then interacting from there as a parent to child or in a relationship between significant others.
Right. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because as a teacher, as an educator, when I was in the classroom, it's sometimes you're just trying to get control, right? You just feel like things are, when we're there, we feel like things are just getting out of control and we're trying to, get a handle of it, but we're not recognizing in that moment. So why is it that we go to that state? Is it because it's already present that we have to heighten ourselves to that deregulated state? We're trying to match it, or
right?
What is it that you think?
Remember, some of those triggers are people, places, things, whatever those triggers are, they're specific to us individually.
Right.
And you being an educator, knowing that sometimes it may be the kids themselves that may be deregulating, and so sometimes you have to change the relationship with whatever the trigger is. meaning you can't wait for the trigger to change. If you wait for the trigger to change, then you will always be forever subjected to be controlled by that trigger. Our job is to change our own relationship with that trigger. Don't put that trigger in a place of power. Change the name from a trigger, call it something else, and then for certain things, what we have to learn how to do is approach whenever we know that we may be going in a space or in an environment or towards a person that may be deregulating. Our job is to make sure we have the tools, the Snicker bar in our pocket, that meditative quote. We make sure we are in a super regulated state, so that this person doesn't dictate how we feel. So we won't flock to where they are. We won't join them in their deregulated state, And so this is something that you can learn to do. Some people have to go deeper in their own personal training and learn how to not get deregulated. They made me do it, that expression, or that environment is just, and so sometimes you just have to not interact. Sometimes you might have to go as far as even changing careers. I remember seeing a lot of teachers in South Florida. I'm like, you know what, you may not be cut out for this job, seriously, because in their deregulation, it's not just them that they're compromising, but you got to understand
that classroom full of kids.
That classroom for the kids, classroom for the kids. And then what they do, sometimes what we choose to cope. Think about when you deregulate, remember the decision makings aren't the best. So we need to cope over here. What are our coping mechanisms that we use to live over here, to dwell over here? Some of it is self-medication, some of it is, things that aren't necessarily adding up to our optimal health.
Right.
Chips,
Camila, you want to jump in on this?
I have a question. So it made me think, and I wasn't sure if you're going to go into this. I was trying to wait. With the deregulated state, could that also include what we view as the more positive feelings, the excitement, like the roller coaster, the highs, the extreme highs, I would say, or even more still for, and thinking of self-love when you're interacting with a partner or a new partner, that honeymoon stage, where those good feelings, would that still be considered a deregulated state?
That's a great question. Well, I want to know the answer too. Baby, you're still mute.
And the answer is, such a great question. That's this line right here. This line of demarcation separates the regulated and deregulated, the trigger. Have you ever heard of the expression being in the zone? Being in the zone, that middle state that you're referring to is kind of where we teeter to where, when you're on the roller coaster, you get the highs and lows, but you don't stay there. The beauty of it is that you get to experience it and a rush flows over you, but you don't stay there, And so some people learn how to have access to the autonomic nervous system while still using the regulated mind. Wow. One example is that the athlete Stephen Curry, right?
If you watch Grand Cru,
Steph Curry. He actually was quoted in an article to say that he paid a trainer to help him with his breathing, so that in game, where a lot of the athletes should be in a regulated state, a lot of the game, emotions of the game sometimes put them in a deregulated state, which doesn't give them access to their best. So a lot of us play over here angry, or, with that passion or whatever, but there's this zone that we can get into by breathing, by meditating, by channeling, that higher self, and still having access to the adrenaline is very possible. That is that butterfly state, that
orgasmic state.
Yes, that's that state that can allow us to still feel pleasure, but not dwell over here. This happens, that state happens to a lot of us, when we're playing music, when we're dancing, when we just had a great workout, right? So that you do have access. Adrenaline and cortisol, like I said, they're not the villains in the story. It's the amount that stays in our body, sometimes that can cause us to be at an unhealthy, deregulated self. So,
And I think the word that you're trying to get to is that it's compounded, you know?
yes,
When you were mentioning the ACEs, studying those trials, yeah, it makes you feel like it's something, that happened to someone in their childhood, but all of those things over the years compound. So it's like you don't even know, like you're saying, that you're in a fearful state until, something knocks you out of it because you're so used to it, such your norm. So it's a compounded trauma, so to speak. So if trauma is the, I guess, the root of most of our deregulated states, what, besides some of the things that you mentioned, what is it that we could do to release trauma specifically?
yeah. So I want to make sure Camilla's question was answered first. Camilla, was that good? Did you get that answer out?
Yes.
Okay, great. So to answer your question, Elisa, I think a part of understanding our trauma is just checking in. Sometimes we don't even know what the trauma did to us. We haven't actually assessed to figure out, man, what did all this trauma do to me? And I have this running joke that I keep adding to the symptoms that aren't in the DSM about what trauma does. I said that trauma turns a lot of us into haters of self first. We turn to self because what trauma registers is sometimes as devaluing. When trauma occurs to us, sometimes we believe that we deserved it, and then our value diminishes. And so if our value diminishes based on a level of trauma that we've been exposed to, then we compromise our level of worthiness. And so there are certain things that we have to figure out from either, doing your own deep study or with a professional to understand how to unlock some of those traumatic experiences to free yourself from living in that trauma brain, that brain that is right there on alert, but is easily triggered, right? That person who goes from 0 to 100, and then that person that, is a great person, but just cannot manage this part over here. That's why I don't want to villainize this. This is a part of all of us. Each one of us can get deregulated at any given time. It's learning how to manage it to get back over here. And so knowing that people are over here more often than they would like to be, then they'd have to figure out, what do I have to do to let go of that trauma brain? How do I process? Acknowledge first, process, get to a space of healing and reconciliation, and then adding some accountability for change, as far as adding tools so that you know how to cope if you ever get triggered, and separating yourself from that trauma will allow you to stay in that regulated mind and know what to do when it actually comes up.
Right. So I heard you basically, so if you know that you're easily triggered, then you should probably seek help, and it's okay to seek help. To those who are trained to help you process those feelings. And I want to add to your response is ritual.
Right.
Ritual is it. I think when we have, especially for the Black experience, when we have this compounded stress, that just seems to be this norm, and we have people around us, right? Family members that we're witnessing and seeing that are going through these states of deregulation. We have to decide that ritual is something that will bring us back to our center, bring us back to the calm that we all have access to, right? And so, sorry, my baby's here. So I wanted to add to yours, but thank you for sharing. Get help if you know that you're easily triggered and you can't control it. Also acknowledge, like you said, process it, have a form of accountability. And I would like to add to that, to form your own rituals, form your own practices, things that make you feel calm, centered, and balanced. That's the word.
So let's take some more questions if there are any questions about this chart. By the way, I'll make this chart available to you guys. I'll send it out in email, probably this evening or tomorrow, to make sure that you have this and you can share it with your family members and friends. But I think this is a chart. This is the type of information that a lot of us need to know before we start some of our relationships, and understand that when we are in the relationships and we're finding ourselves over here, then we have to do something about us first before we look to change the relationship or the person, because a lot of this is very telling of the history of trauma. I have this doodle, this doodle. I like to, just draw stuff randomly, and I don't know if you can see it. Tell me it's in the middle. Can you see it? Can you see it? Yes, no? Shake your hand, Elisa. I can't see myself. Can you see it? Okay, great. So I did this weird little doodle on this notepad, and I didn't even know what I was doing it for. I was just bored when I was doing it, and I picked it up and flipped it over to the next page to see, if I could use the next page to start taking notes for this session. And I saw the imprint that was from the first page on the second page, and then I saw the imprint on the third page, fourth page, fifth page, sixth page, seventh page. The imprints from the first page still deep enough to impact the seventh page. And I know this is not, any scientific knowledge, but of course, there have been research to say that our parents' traumatic experiences, our grandparents' traumatic experiences can still live inside of us. We still are interacting with the world from a traumatic state based on not even our own trauma, not even accounting for some of the trauma we witnessed within our own lives, and not having the opportunity to process those trauma, let them go. A lot of us operate unknowingly from that deregulated state. Imagine seeing your parents' relationship function over here. It would lead us to believe that this is how relationships should function. Imagine having a parent that parented you from here. Then we believe that this is how parents should parent, and understand that this is not the healthy parts of us. This is not where we thrive. This is not where we actually have the intimacy that we desire. This is not where the self-care kicks in. And so learning this and sharing this with each other helps us have a better awareness of where we are mentally, emotionally, and allows us to show up the best version of ourselves. Now I'm going to go to what you were saying earlier, Elisa, about some of the things that we can do. Of course, the first thing is, making sure that we check ourselves, check yourself, assessment, what is really going on, asking that question and not giving that generic answer. I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm okay. No, really stopping and thinking, what have I been feeling and experiencing in my body? One of those things that I had was back pain because I had a lot of stress, there was a lot of stress and it would manifest in my back. And so when I alleviated the stress, my back started feeling great, And so asking the question, what is my physical body telling me about my mental state, my emotional state? And then asking yourself the same question, what am I feeling in my emotional state that's allowing my mental state to be impacted in that way, or my physical state to be impacted in that way? So checking in with yourself is one of the things that you can start doing, making sure you're assessing. And then the acceptance. Am I okay with what I feel? Sometimes we check in and then we know that we're not in a good state. And then what are the steps that we take afterwards? What accountability do we have with checking in with ourselves to move the needle towards being in a regulated state more often than not? Utilizing different approaches, of course, breathing, meditation, yoga, dancing, therapies are many forms, aroma, massage, mental health, whatever it is that you need, please learn what it is, because it helps you show self-love to you and allows you to show up in not just your life, but everyone else's life in a better way, And so these are some of the things that I want to share with you guys. Repeat as often as necessary, And so highlights of the week. The reason why I wanted to end with this one is because I want to end on understanding some of those things that allowed us to feel regulated. When you highlight, one thing I love about watching ESPN, I don't watch ESPN anymore because that's deregulating, And I used to love when they used to just run the highlights for me, 2 minutes, and that's it. You know, give me all the good stuff. I don't need to hear all the injuries, all of the drama, all of the backstories. Just give me the highlights. And so when we focus on those things that allow us to stay in the regulatory state, we are more likely to go towards it, meaning we're paying attention to them enough to where we can repeat those things. So think about the highlights for your week when you were the most regulated, when you were in that zone, like Camilla was talking about earlier, when you're in that high mental and emotional state, feeling good on that roller coaster ride. What are some of those things that got us there? How can we stay there? What do we have to repeat? What can we add to our days, to our lives, to our weeks? What can we remove? Who do we have to stop taking their calls, stop answering their texts? Who can we reach out to more that will allow us to feel more in community, to feel regulated more often? And so answering these questions will definitely help allow us to just check in, know where we are, get the best version of that, rinse and repeat it, and so forth. And so this is the end of my presentation. I'm going to go to the end, that last slide again, so that I can let Elisa take over. If there are any more questions we can answer.
Oh, Wita, and Mike.
Greetings.
Greetings.
Hey.
I'm not going to be long. It's not a question. I just got tickled when I saw check yourself, because when I saw that, I thought about back in the day when we used to say check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Right.
And I think it's befitting now, because if you don't check yourself, you can stay in that alert stage and wreck yourself mentally, physically, everything. So I enjoyed it again, and thanks for recording. I'm looking forward to listening to it again. There were some portions I missed, so thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. You know, I was saying earlier about the Ice Cube, you know, I know check yourself is from the old school, but I remember the first person who I heard it that impacted me was Ice Cube. But I know check yourself goes back. And so I thank you for that comment, because one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we left with was some of us have wisdom that dates this study, that dates this research. And so although I love to give credit to Dr. Bruce Perry, a lot of this information has already been disseminated in our own culture from our own understanding. Is just putting it in scientific terms. Checking yourself is such an important thing. Like we would say that lightly, you know, but the meaning behind it is to really just take a look at yourself before you take a look at me. Check yourself, you know, like understand where you are in the context of our relation before you look at me holistically. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to create that balance internally before we then look to somebody else for the change that is going to help us feel, you know, or experience the relationship in a different way. Mama Son, I saw you have your hand up. You can go ahead.
I have a question. Thank you again for tonight. I was so pleasantly surprised because I did not know that you all were going to do a second session of Self-Love Friday. Period. I didn't know you were going to do one, period. And then I didn't know that you were going to do one so close to the one that you did initially. So I just love this. I love any opportunity for me to better myself and to share with the community so that we all can better ourselves. So I just thank you all so much. And my question is, you know, there are so many of us who still have difficulty with going to therapy. And so even trying therapy. So I wanted to ask if you found any particular approach effective in just getting someone to try therapy. That's the first question. And then the second question is, for those who we still are unsuccessful with in getting to try therapy, are there any alternatives in the meantime that you would suggest they do or we do to expose them?
Of course, right. Two great questions. And listen, it's my pleasure. It's our pleasure to do this. This is something that we've done, back in South Florida a lot. I used to do a lot of talks, pro bono and paid. And, I always found value in making sure that the community can be served in a way to where they understand the value of a mental health professional before the trust can be built to actually go to a mental health professional. So to answer both of those questions, kind of sandwich it together, I'll tell you a little history about what I did before I opened my private practice. I had a nonprofit by the name of the Go-To Therapist, where I galvanized some of the local therapists that were in South Florida with me, and we created the directory to where we would go out into our own communities in South Florida and volunteer at our churches, our schools, our community centers, and do presentations at least once a month, so that the community can be familiar with us, allowing mental health to be a topic that is the norm, seeing us. And of course, all of the therapists who were a part of the Go-To Therapists were Black and minority therapists. And so we were serving the communities that we were in. And so building that relationship builds equity in the understanding of what mental health is, seeing who the mental health professionals are, understanding that we are people just like they are, basically normalizing the conversation. And so this is one of the forms where we can start normalizing the conversation of mental health. Doing these talks at our churches, in our communities regularly, allows us to feel like this is a topic that I can bring home and have at the dinner table, driving my kids to school, going out to the movies, whatever it is. This is a part of our day-to-day, and so making sure we can have these talks as often as possible in different spaces allows the normalcy of interacting with mental health professionals. Now, that's the first part. Well, one of the parts. Another part to it is, what can we start doing for those who may not be willing to go to therapy? And I want to always put the power back in the hands of the people, in the minds of the people. My job is irrelevant when you know and utilize the tools that are right there available to you. And I want us to start building the resilience of knowing what we are capable of and utilizing the tools of nature, of our minds, of our spirit, of our community to get our minds and our bodies and our emotional states healthy. When you have a balanced community, more likely than not, the people that are in that community are balanced. And so it's learning what is necessary for that community, for that individual that the person is in, to create some of that balance, but also making sure that the tools that are readily available for them are being utilized. Some of us may just need to go for more walks, take more mental health days, being able to say, what, I'm going to go to the beach today instead of going to work. I'm going to take a day off to where I'm just going to spend time at my house. I'm going to cook breakfast for myself. I'm going to, put on some radical self-love to where I treat myself to a mani-pedi, whatever it is. Sometimes the tools are right there. It's just making the choice to say that today, this week, this month, this year, I'm going to choose me. I'm going to make sure that I figure out what are those things that allow me to be my best self and leaning towards those. Now, the balance is sometimes we may not have all the tools in our communities or the tools necessary to make those changes. And so that's when, if the balance is too much, or if you're in balance, meaning you are more in a deregulated state, suffering from depression, anxiety, or a number of things, then for a period of time, of course, the diagnosable thing would say 2 weeks. But I'm saying, as long as when you realize that you're not your best self and you have not been successful in coping with the tools that you have, then I think it's time to reach out to a mental health professional. Now, the last part is that it's not a one size fit all. I think people just give up based on some of those interactions that they've had, some of the stereotypical things that they've seen. The climate is changing. We have a lot of minority and Black professionals that are in the field that are willing and capable of helping us out. We just have to know where those resources are and reach out. And when you find one, share it with your friends. Don't be selfish. Share it with people that you really care about. Say, hey, I found a great therapist. Let me give you that person's number. And then if you have tools that you have used that have been successful for you in therapy, it's not saying that it's a one size fit all, but we can always share but getting them there is their job. I made this a practice of mine to not to work with men specifically that get referred to me or get registered with my practice through someone else, through a third party. Meaning, if mom is registering their adult son, I'll tell mom, say, hey, have that person reach out to me, because I want to know that they're vested in it and not coming in to think that this is a consequential interaction between me and them. They're getting punished by some way. It's mandatory for them to go. They have an ultimatum to go. That's not going to be a person that I work with successfully. So the willingness has to be from them. And sometimes it may take just a conversation. I take a lot of calls to where I stay on the phone for at least 15, 20 minutes sometimes, answering questions to help people feel comfortable about sitting in front of a mental health professional. And if it's not me, because sometimes it may not be me that has the capacity to help them, I usually take the time and make referrals. I'm like, look, I may not be that person for you, but here's 3 other numbers that you can use. Here's a website that you can use to go and keep looking for that individual that's going to help you become the best version of you through therapy. Was that helpful, Mama San?
Absolutely. That was very helpful. And I just want to add that it's so difficult not to take on the responsibility of someone else's emotional instability or issues when it's your children in particular.
Right, right. When it comes to that age.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, when it comes to a specific age, you know, like when it's our children, when they're in that, you know, minor growing up stage, it's easier for us to then enmesh and believe that we have to feel what they feel in order for them to know that we care for them, you know, and that's not necessarily the resolution, you know. And then another part of what I know, and this is a knowing that we all have, is that naturally, a lot of us are empaths, you know, we feel it, even if it's on the other side of the world, you know, we feel it. And so sometimes we have to tune ourselves out from certain information so that we won't bring that air of that you know, that bleeding heart to every situation, because sometimes we're not at our best when we come to our kids and they're deregulated, and we get deregulated because they're deregulated, and we're fearful because they're fearful, or we're anxious because they're anxious. And so we have to learn how to parse what their experiences are sometimes, you know, and be able to experience what we need to be that best version in that situation to allow them to come to us. One of the techniques I learned as a therapist very early on is how to mirror and utilize that mirror to allow people to then mirror you. You mirror them for only a short period of time, allowing them to feel that empathetic response from you visually, you know, audibly, in your tone. And then you start to change your tone, your posture, your words, in order for them to follow where you're going. Meaning now you're creating that flock intentionally. You know that you can get to a regulated state sooner, so you get there. But you do join. Sometimes it's okay to get there if you know that you have the techniques to get to a regulated state sooner than later. If you know that you may not have it, then get to a regulated state first before you go to that interaction with that child. You know, another point that I need to make about this, because I remember now, is that I'm also an infant mental health trainer. And one of those trainings, one of the articles that we read is called The Ghost in the Nursery. And just the name itself gave me the heebie-jeebies. I'm like, what? The ghost in the nursery? But what it was talking about was the impacts of our grandparents' behavior towards our parents on how we parent our children, meaning the traumatic experiences that we've had from the hands of our parents and how they've interacted with us and our own traumatic experiences will then impact how we interact with our kids in a healthy or unhealthy way. Whether they're traumatized or not, we're still living in the ghost of what occurred to us in the lives of our kids. And so sometimes it takes us learning how to separate ourselves from our own trauma so that we won't be the people introducing the level of deregulation to our kids.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. And as you were talking, it really just, it was emphasizing to me the importance of surrounding. It emphasized to me the importance for me of surrounding myself with balance, you know, with balanced communities and activities and people. So that what you're saying is being reinforced on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah. Most definitely. You know, like I said, this was a game changer for me because this awareness allowed me to become more responsible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's a moment by moment thing. It's a moment. And also, I think it's a situation by situation thing too, when it comes to our children, where we're given different opportunities, right? To step in and just ask ourselves that little question, could I be seeing this just another way? You know, when they aggravate us or when they do certain things, like, is there something other that I can see right here in this moment, right? And it's that taking that time to pause, like we were saying, you know, to just, okay, whew, you know, I wanted to react. I wanted to, you know, let them know how I'm feeling. And I think that's one of the things that we want to hold them accountable for those feelings, but they're not responsible for them. You know, they're not. And like attracts like. So the best thing we can do is put ourselves in a position where we see the best, you know, in our children, just like we want to see the best in us. Because if we practice that self-love, you know, that radical self-love towards them in those moments, we're actually really doing it to ourselves, right? The secret is, I love you.
Right.
Secret is, I love you, right? So we want to thank you so much for this time. Again, please, let's stay in contact. We wanted to let you know that if you have already RSVP'd, if you are day ones, you don't have to RSVP anymore. We will just always just send you whatever we have. We're not sure when we're gonna have the next session, but we hope it'll be soon. And that's why we need your feedback. So if you tell us, we'll do it, you know. And another thing is share our information, because we know not just individually people can benefit, but sometimes it's our teams. You know, I've been going, in my team, we've been doing communication workshops with each other, and it has really helped us to work more cohesively. So it may be, you know, where we're employed, you know, where this information could be valuable. So please share our information. Let's stay in contact. If we have your information, again, you do not need to RSVP. We will just, when the next one comes, you will know, okay? And I do have a brief, for those of you who did the first survey for our first session, you saw it was really quick. I do have a brief survey I'm going to put in the chat for this session tonight to give you another opportunity to let us know some of the topics. And I think, honestly, self-love and parenting is probably one of the next ones we'll touch on just from this, because I know I need it. I know I need it. So please click on the survey and just tell us your honest feedback about this session and what other topics we can cover. And let's stay in touch. Let's keep this network going so that we have this organic community that is all about self-love, showing ourselves the love that we deserve, that we are worthy of. So many, many blessings to you all. Have a good night.
I love myself more than anyone. And I got love for the genuine. Anyone, genuine. I love myself more than anyone. Many one brown, many one black. They left the sequence on walls to get back. The message for years I've been lost in the crack.